Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Monsul, the host, the creator, and the producer of this program called Communicating Today. We've been on Channel 10 now for over 15 years, working our way well up to show number 500, believe it or not. Channel 10 is in the state of Virginia, and our program, Communicating Today, is the third longest running show right here on Channel 10, believe it or not. We have a very interesting program for you tonight. And by the way, folks, for those of you who watch us on a regular basis, you know we come on every Sunday afternoon at 3:30, every Tuesday morning at 11:30 a.m., and every Wednesday evening in prime time at 8:30 p.m. Before I introduce my guest for tonight's show, I'd like to make a very quick, brief announcement. Some very dear friends of mine are having a wonderful activity which is going to be taking place at the Woodlawn Plantation, which is located in Mount Vernon, Virginia. And I'm sure a lot of you folks here that are local know where that is and what that is all about. And they're having their 44th annual needlework exhibition, which is a terrific function, wonderful food, wonderful needlework put on by these terrific folks. And it's going to be running for the whole month of March at the Woodlawn Plantation. For further information on that particular function, you can contact their website at www.woodlawn1805, which is when the plantation was founded too, by the way, 1805.org. Woodlawn1805.org. Ladies and gentlemen, for more information on that wonderful activity the whole month of March. Now for our program tonight, we have a very special guest who's sitting right alongside of me here. His name is David Scott. He's an author who has written a wonderful new book entitled The IT Wars, Managing the Business Technology Weave in the New Millennium. Terrific book that I read through most of it. It's a great book from the standpoint of communications, how people should communicate more effectively between the business aspect of an organization, being an association, a corporation, a government agency, and the technology folks, the IT folks, how they can communicate and come together and communicate more effectively so that that particular organization can be more successful. Let me tell you a little bit about David Scott. Has over 20 years of experience in helping to define business-driven IT strategies. He's created a philosophy and a culture for business, an e-culture, if you will, that is dedicated to closing divides, directing purpose, and achieving results. That culture is the Business Technology Weave, part of the title of his book. Mr. Scott has directed information technology endeavors for many Washington, D.C. metro organizations, including private business, government agencies, and associations, and has consulted on a contractual basis with those organizations. He's helped to restore in place and grow IT, business planning, and success in several global Fortune 500 companies in leading areas such as public relations, patient care, laboratory, direct mail marketing, telecommunications, and food safety. In addition, has assisted several other organizations in human and environmental services. His most recent success is his first book, which is the one that we're going to be talking about tonight, again entitled IT Wars, Managing the Business Technology Weave in the New Millennium, a book that has recently, believe it or not, wonderful achievement here, been selected for the MBA, graduate level studies at the University of Wisconsin, a new development, and it has also been followed on by its recent inclusion in the Fairfax County, Virginia Public Library System and also Walden Books. So a lot of great things going on with this terrific book that my guest for tonight's program, David Scott, sitting right alongside of me here, has accomplished. And David, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, John. It's very good to be here.
My pleasure. And let's talk about the book. Now, I guess it's a very interesting title, IT Wars, Managing the Business Technology Weave. How did you come about creating that title for your wonderful new book?
Well, John, you know, today technology is a foundational underpinning to any kind of business. If you remove technology, business is done. It seems today that in capturing the best fit and use of technology, it's like making a jigsaw puzzle, except several people have their hands on the pieces, and the pieces change size and color as you go along. Sometimes somebody upends the table entirely and you start over.
Yeah. Now I noticed that in part of that title you have the word weave, and as I look upon that word, it's sort of like interlocking or interlacing and so forth. And I guess what you just said basically on the title of the book, it's interweaving and interlocking and interconnecting the business side of the house with the information technical side of the house so that they can come together and weave together and form a unison and hopefully be more successful as an organization.
Exactly right, John. It's about bringing disparate groups of people together and having them communicate more effectively. There's an acceleration of coming demands, new security achievements, there's speed to market considerations. People want their products on an immediate basis, and competition no longer means going faster than your competition, it means out-accelerating them.
Right. And having a better handle and a better control on what's going on within your business, of course.
Exactly.
Or if it's an association, a nonprofit organization, or even a government agency, the kind of folks that you've worked with. Now, the name of our program, of course, ladies and gentlemen, and certainly David, who knows that, he's on our show tonight, is called Communicating Today. So we're all about topics that have to do with communications, and that's what we try to stress on our show. And of course, your book is all about communicating and bringing these different kinds of groups together, the business folks along with the technology folks. So why is that so important? And I think you touched on that a little bit already, but if you want to maybe elaborate on why this aspect of communications is so important.
Well, sometimes what happens, I think, is that business doesn't fully engage in creating a business-driven IT strategy to create a business-serving one. Business owns IT. IT serves at the pleasure of business. So business has a stake in the outcomes of solutions. It's very important for these groups to understand each other, to even understand each other's terms to a little better degree. You've got to have a common arena where people can come in and share the vision and mount a responsible forward edge so that the organization transitions into the future on an effective basis. And that's going to become ever more important to do that efficiently.
Especially when technology is growing so fast and there are so many innovations and changes and upgrades that are happening almost on a daily or weekly basis. You pick up the trade journals and you find out there's a new piece of equipment out there, a new technology, something that wasn't there a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago, and everybody has to keep up with this growing technology. And I think that's one of the bases of the success of the United States of America versus the rest of the world is our technology expertise.
Correct.
And how we communicate with that more effectively is so important. Now, I noticed that in your book, as I read through, and a very exciting and a very interesting book too, by the way, David, and ladies and gentlemen, I know you will enjoy reading his book as I did. You have a couple of terms in there that I found rather provocative and rather interesting. It says that IT, information technology, is, quote, a necessary evil. It's somewhat sinister. It's a money pit in the eyes of business. Now, my goodness, what's all that terminology all about?
Not always, John.
Not always.
However, in some cases.
Since you're an IT guy, not always.
Sure. Not if you're doing things right. But in many cases, organizations, they find themselves mounting what I call false solutions. You know, if business didn't communicate expectations appropriately, or if IT employed filters and didn't quite glean what the appropriate expectations were, you find that you're delivering solutions that either no one can use or they hobble along on things that are not optimal. So naturally, business sometimes disengages a little bit. They're a little bit fearful about technology. It may not be sinister and evil per se, but in some cases there are people who are quite afraid of it.
I think you hit the nail right on the head, David, because I think when you don't understand things, and that's true with anything in life, any walk of life, or any subject, or any product that you're thinking about, is that if you don't understand something, if it's foreign to you, then you're afraid of it. You back off, you stay away from it. And let's face it, a lot of the business folks, a lot of the executive folks that run businesses, top management, middle management, and so forth, don't understand information technology, don't understand technology in general, so they back off from it, they're afraid of it, and it becomes this so-called thing, as you mentioned in your book, somewhat of a sinister thing, a necessary evil in the eyes of business, and they just have to learn to find a way to become acclimated to it.
And also, you know, you mentioned the money pit. If you have a bad outcome, it's viewed as money down the drain, and people are afraid to engage again. They back away, they take subsequent stabs at success. Sometimes people don't completely buy into the notion of success. The book has something in it called a success culture and how to bias everyone's head, if you will, for success and create, you know, ultimate outcomes in that regard. So,
or an organization, a nonprofit, an association, a government agency, or a for-profit corporation, a business, has already previously experienced some situation where they tried something once and it didn't work, and it was very expensive and it was very costly, and they've already been burned. They say if you burn once, then you could be burned twice.
Absolutely.
So we tried this a couple of years ago, and it was a flop. It was a complete failure. Now what are we going to do? Put more money into something like this again, and maybe lose a second time? We can't afford to lose money like that. So they're a little bit wary of it.
Absolutely, it's
previous
important.
Experience.
But, well, it's important to define projects correctly at the outset to arrive at solutions that will work, to mount a proper plan, and then deliver the solutions that fit what business needs, with an eye toward the future also.
Now, we talk about some terminology here, and two very important words, I think, planning versus reactionary mode. So to me, it seems like planning is something you do ahead of time, and reactionary is something, well, I'll let you go ahead and differentiate the difference between
you know,
the two.
it's very interesting. If the two sides struggle to come together, there's disengagement. IT sometimes then, in trying to craft solutions, will exceed the limit of their lead, is the way I put it. And they'll start to guess what business needs. And that can only be disaster. And many IT leaders pay a price for that. At the same time, business is hobbled by limping along on insufficient business supports. There's a great example here just recently about being reactionary. One of the leading wireless security vendors just hosted a security conference, and it was found that 60% of the attendees were on unsecured portable devices. Now some of those government agencies, secure government agencies, healthcare organizations, and Fortune 500 companies, some of these handheld devices became unauthorized access portals into the conference network, and they suffered 57 denial of service attacks the first day. So this is a reactionary posture now. They had to clean that up during the conference, rather than being proactive and asking people when they came in what they were bringing into the conference, and here's our security standards, and here's how you adhere to those standards.
Great, David. I just got the signal that we're halfway through the program, and I told you the show moves very quickly. We're 15 minutes into the program, and we have a policy of reintroducing our show. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who may have tuned in a little bit late, and we hope there weren't legions of you out here who did that, but we're communicating today is the name of the show. I'm John Monsul, the host, creator, and producer of this program. Been on Channel 10 for a long, long time, working our way well up to show number 500. And we come on 3 times every week, Sunday afternoon, Tuesday morning, and Wednesday evening in prime time. My special guest for tonight's show has just written a wonderful new book. His name is David Scott. He's sitting right alongside of me here. He said I can call him Dave if I'd like to, so it's Dave and John. His book is entitled The IT, which stands for Information Technology for those of you who may not be the initiated or the uninitiated. IT Wars, Managing the Business Technology Weave in the New Millennium is the title of his book. We've been putting a picture of the cover of his book up on our screen periodically during the course of our 30-minute program. And we've also been putting up periodically at the bottom of your screen his website, in case you folks might want to get some more information about the book, where you can acquire it. If you have questions about it, would like to contact the author right here, David Scott. And in case you didn't see it on the bottom of your screen, it's www.david-scott.net. Scott, S-C-O-T-T.net. And we'll bring that up for you again later on in the program, ladies and gentlemen. David, now back to our program, of course. And now there's another term that you use in your book, which I found rather interesting. And it has the acronym of BIT, B-I-T, which stands for Business Implementation Team. What's that all about?
Be careful how you say that, John.
I'll try.
Yeah, the Business Implementation Team. You know, this is kind of a sales-ready environment for good ideas. It's where qualified business people come to plan the forward progression of the business, the company, the organization. It's where the IT leaders come into that same arena and partner with these folks. Now, what you bring into the BIT team are people who understand technology, the business people who understand technology and like technology, and you bring IT people in who essentially lose the junk terms, the arcane language, acronyms, or who have a chip on their shoulder and are out to show everybody what they know and you don't. and you bring them in there for common purpose, and you craft what I call a responsible forward edge for the organization. Some organizations need to be bleeding edge if you're a tech company. Some organizations need a more laid back edge if they have limited budget and they're interested in watching what other people do so that they can then follow. For each of those, leading edge or a bit of a slower edge, that's a collective responsible forward edge. It's a generic term that applies to any organization. It even applies to departments, groups, and people. I have a responsibility to maintain a responsible forward edge. I need to be proactive. I need to advance my knowledge on behalf of my organization, as does my department. And this is an important concept for companies.
Is this something that would happen before a project is undertaken? Or is this to decide maybe, do we need a project in the first place to improve operations within the organization? Or at kind of what phase or what stage along the way would maybe this BIT or this business implementation team come into play?
These things are ongoing. Change is a continuum. This readies people to participate in the project you describe. This is so people come in the gate ready to do business, fully equipped, ready for action.
Right. Very, very interesting, that's for sure. Now, another thing you mentioned in your book is that 80% of data is unstructured, and you can define that term in a second. Employees spend 50% of their time looking for things. Because of that, Fortune 500 companies lose upwards of $12 billion a year because people spend all this time looking for things that they can't find because everything is disorganized, and because 80% of data is unstructured. So what's that all about?
Well, you know, you can think of a record in a database. That record is part of structured data. You can leverage that record against other records to produce reports, to generate statistics, to communicate something to people. Unstructured data is pieces of paper, electronic documents that have no central control. It can even be structured data that's siloed in one system, like an accounting system, versus another silo of structured data, maybe a core mission critical business application. So how does somebody, particularly if there's business peril, how does someone say, I need to see all of our correspondence regarding a certain client? I would like to pull a string and assemble as complete a picture as possible for all data that we have regarding that client. Well, it's a manual, cumbersome process when you have all of these discrete siloed systems. So content management essentially breaks those barriers.
Right, and this is according to that subject we just talked about, according to a group up in Massachusetts called the Gartner Group. I guess they are industry specialists who look in and evaluate those kinds of things.
Correct.
Now you mentioned content management. That's part of a total big picture that you mentioned in your books, things like content management, security, databases, applications, shelf life, bandwidth, connectivity. These are all technical terms that we're not going to bore our viewers with here today and go into a lot of explanations and details about all these subtopics. But you mentioned something about content management, which you started to talk about just a moment ago. And why again, I guess another word, when you say structured and unstructured, to me it has a connotation of organized versus disorganized. Structured versus unstructured. Does that make sense?
That's a very good
way. It's an acronym.
Yes, that's a very good way to look at it, John. As a matter of fact.
And it boils down to managing and structuring and organizing this content to make it easier to find things so that the people, as we said a moment ago, 50% of the Fortune 500 companies, people spend time finding things that they can't find, costing tens of billions of dollars.
It's not only a matter of finding things, John, it's repurposing things rather than having to recreate them. It's also looking for common knowledge or content in various different areas and bringing it together for context and leverage.
Right. Now, one of the things we just mentioned when we alluded to some of the divisions or compartments of information technology a moment ago is something that's extremely important, especially nowadays with what's been happening security-wise. So there's a very important topic of security. We can think of things like New York 9/11 back in 2001. And we can think of what happened just last year in New Orleans with the terrible Katrina flood. and all the damage and all the loss that was experienced by those poor folks down there, practically wiping out and eliminating an important American city with a tremendous amount of heritage to it. And then we rely again upon this word called security. Why is that so important, certainly when it comes to IT, information technology?
Consider New Orleans, John. Consider the divide in communication that caused us to lose an American city. Here was a city that had underspecified levees. People knew, civic leaders, scientists, even the local populace, that those levees likely would not protect against Category 4 or 5 hurricanes. But they didn't fix those levees for approximately $30 billion over time is what that would have cost. Instead, we'll spend $400 to $500 billion reconstituting New Orleans, to say nothing about the loss of life and that tragedy. So we need to bring, you think about the business side of the business of getting those levees fixed. That's a tremendous divide, and we've got to close that. And IT wars is part of that. It goes beyond information technology. It rolls up to national security and talks about just raw technology and bringing that to bear and affecting the business of getting things done.
And that goes back to what you mentioned a moment ago at the first part of our program when we compared those two words about planning versus reacting. Now, if they had done a better job of planning about spreading that money out over a number of years to strengthen those levees in a planning mode, then they wouldn't be reacting now and maybe spending 10 times or 15 or 20 times as much money to react to what happened after the results of that terrible flood. Planning versus reacting.
Exactly, John. And if you consider the 9/11 Commission, who said the most important failure was one of imagination, it's not hard to imagine something like an electromagnetic pulse. A single nuclear warhead over the continental United States would remove all data and all electricity, all power from our country. We would have a post-Katrina social breakdown on a coast-to-coast scale, the maximum national drama. Prevention is key, imagination is key. We need to close divides, we need to bring awareness to those sorts of problems.
And that brings up this other term that you had in one of the latter chapters of your book called the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, which some of you more technically inclined folks out there may be familiar with. But in your book you talk about how this one terrible security problem could be the very latest threat. And with that technology and one nuclear weapon employing this technique of the electromagnetic pulse could destroy the kinds of things you just mentioned and turn our civilization of the 2007 back into the mid-1800s. And you mentioned that possibility in your book.
And it's even worse than that, because the mid-1800s was a progressing society with coherent paper records. People were growing food near where they consumed it. If you were to take our society and remove all technical supports, all data, commerce would crash, no power. All emergency action would take place on line-of-sight basis. There would be no chain of command exercised for the military. We would be reduced to small factions of people hell-bent on survival. And thus, and maybe you're getting ready to ask me about BizSec.
Yeah. My next question, as a matter of fact, David, is something in fact, the last chapter of your book, which I found extremely interesting. And by the way, folks, this is a great book, IT Wars, by David Scott, our guest for tonight's program. You must get this book, and there's that website that we've been putting up periodically, which will tell you all about how you can get it. But the last chapter was very interesting, I thought, something called BizSec, S-E-C. Business Security is the abbreviation, is the actual of the abbreviation. Now, what's that and how can that help? And that's a very interesting thought.
You know, the individual today who is a stakeholder in safety and security, the environment, and in times of terror, we're the ultimate stakeholders. We ask, where can we make a contribution? Government has asked us to be vigilant. What do we do? And we find that we're often feeling powerless. But there's another stakeholder in the arena, and that's business. Business has to have a place to conduct business. Now, let's consider a BizSec if there had been one in New Orleans. BizSec would have said, our environment's in peril, we're living in a saucer-shaped city below sea level, and if the levees break, we're flooded. BizSec could have lobbied politicians and civic leaders and published reports in libraries and online and kept this sort of Damocles kind of threat in people's awareness. Now, if each organization in a geographic area, say county or township, city, mounted a BizSec roundtable, organizations could take a security officer or designate and place that person at that table once a month for an hour, and they could talk about these kinds of perils. A city could well ask, what would be our business posture if there were 1 or 5 suicide bombers? Who would get on the subway? Who would go to work? Who would stay home with their children? What would happen to commerce? And that's where BizSec can aid in that. It's the exchange of ideas.
Just got the 1-minute sign, David, so you know what that means. We got to start wrapping up. I want to thank you so much, David, for being on our program tonight. You've been a wonderful guest, extremely knowledgeable and informative. Come back and see us again sometime and let us know how successful your wonderful book is. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. His name is David Scott. He's been our guest. Wonderful book called IT Wars, Managing the Business Technology Weave in the New Millennium. And you can see it. The website's been up several times, www.david-scott.net. We always go out and close our program, ladies and gentlemen, by saying, keep on communicating for success. And come back and see us again for another wonderful program like our terrific guest for tonight and his great book, Mr. David Scott. Bye-bye. We'll see you all next week. Have a good one.